Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, February 13th, 2026. Homeland Security Department shutdown looks all but inevitable with Congress out of session and no deal in sight to extend funding beyond tonight. Democrats are insisting that immigration enforcement reform be part of any agreement. Government inflation report comes in a bit lower than expected. Consumer price index rose 2.4% in January from a year ago. President Donald Trump congratulates U.S. Special Forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for their role in capturing Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro last month. U.S. and world leaders attend the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Topics include a perceived divide between the U.S. and Europeans on their priorities, the war in Ukraine, and climate change policy. We'll hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Michael Walz, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom of California, plus German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emanuel Macron, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And an update from NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman about Artemis II, the delayed mission to send astronauts around the moon for the first time in 50 years. Washington Post writes the Department of Homeland Security is expected to shut down early Saturday morning as congressional Democrats and the White House remain at an impasse over new restrictions on federal immigration agents. Shutdown beginning at 12:01 a.m. Saturday would impact about 13% of the federal civilian workforce, including the Transportation Security Administration, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the Coast Guard. But Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, the main targets of Democrats' outrage, would be able to continue immigration enforcement efforts due to an influx of funding from the Republican tax and spending law passed last summer. That reporting from the Washington Post. President Donald Trump was asked about the coming partial government shutdown as he left the White House.
Are you actively talking with Democrats right now about a DHS shutdown?
We're talking, but, we have to protect law enforcement. ICE has done a phenomenal job. Border Patrol, we have a closed border for the first time in history. We have to protect law enforcement, our police, our Border Patrol, ICE, and others in law enforcement. And I'm very much, look, I know what they want. I know what they can live with. The Democrats have gone crazy. They're radical left lunatics. That's why their cities are so unsafe. The blue cities are the cities that are unsafe. So we have to protect our law enforcement.
President Donald Trump speaking with reporters outside the White House, the noise of the helicopter in the background. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was also asked about the expected Homeland Security Department shutdown in a Fox News interview today.
President Trump has been and always will be on the side of the American people. He wants our government to remain open, and unfortunately, it appears that Democrats are barreling our government towards another shutdown for political and partisan reasons. The White House has been very much engaged with Democrats in serious discussions and negotiations over immigration enforcement policy. In fact, we have not only sent counter proposals, but actual legislative text to Capitol Hill in the hopes of coming to an agreement to avoid this shutdown, but Democrats have left Washington, and now the brave men and women of our United States Coast Guard, of FEMA, who are still helping Americans turn their lights on from the recent winter storm, and the men and women of TSA that work diligently to keep our airports moving and keep flights efficiently going, are going to go without a paycheck. Remember, these are American workers who went 43 days without a paycheck in the last shutdown because Chuck Schumer and Democrats wanted to play partisan politics with Democrat funding. It's unacceptable to President Trump and the White House. We've made every good faith effort to try to keep the government open. And of course, the brave men and women of both ICE and CBP will also go without pay unless we can find a way with the One Big Beautiful Bill funding to get them the money they need so we can continue the important work they are doing to remove violent predators from our nation's communities, which is something the American people want to see happen.
White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt today on the Fox News Channel. Washington Examiner's Washington Secrets column reports this week that when Karoline Leavitt goes on maternity leave in May, filling in will be, quote, a rolling cast of big hitters, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and other cabinet secretaries, White House Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller, and, quote, other special guests, depending on the news cycle. Source for that information, Tricia McLaughlin, spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security. That was from the Washington Examiner. And now more on the expected Homeland Security Department shutdown starting just after midnight tonight. and the Democrats' demands of reforms to immigration enforcement. The House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries held a news conference today in Washington.
It appears increasingly likely that at midnight tonight, DHS funding for the Coast Guard, for FEMA, and for TSA will lapse. Why? Because Donald Trump and Republicans have decided that they have zero interest in getting ICE under control. The American people know ICE is out of control and that they need to be reined in. And Democrats are working hard to do just that. We believe that taxpayer dollars should be used to make life more affordable for everyday Americans, not brutalize or kill them, which is what we've seen in Minneapolis with the cold-blooded killing of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. In this country, immigration enforcement should be fair, it should be just, and it should be humane. That's not what's taking place right now in the United States of America, where law-abiding immigrant families are being violently targeted and American communities are being brutalized. Dramatic changes are needed at the Department of Homeland Security in terms of ICE and CBP. Absent that, Republicans have decided to shut down parts of the federal government once again. Questions?
Mr. Leader, the DHS is a massive agency. It's going to impact millions of people. Shouldn't Congress be working right now to solve that problem?
I'm here, ready, willing, and able to have a conversation with anyone, anytime, any place. That's always been the Democratic posture. Mike Johnson has once again sent House Republicans home. This is the same approach, failed approach, that Speaker Johnson and Republicans took during the 43-day Trump Republican shutdown in the fall. Strange to me that they would decide to take a similar approach. It didn't work out for them. It didn't work for the American people. And during that 43-day government shutdown, we made one consistent demand: extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And then at the end of it, when it was all said and done, one thing happened in the House of Representatives. We passed a 3-year extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. The failed strategy of Republicans, it didn't work out then, it's not going to work out now. And we've drawn a hard line in the sand on behalf of the American people, and we're not going to allow the Congress to cross it. ICE needs to be dramatically reformed. Period. Full stop.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, holding a news conference in the U.S. Capitol building. Again, the House and Senate not in session today, not expected to be in session next week. While Democrats are focusing on immigration enforcement reforms, President Trump and his administration and congressional Republicans have been pushing a bill to require photo identification to vote in federal elections and proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote, and also requiring states to remove non-citizens from voter rolls. The bill is titled Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or SAVE Act. It passed the House this week and is pending in the Senate, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem promoted the bill in Phoenix, Arizona, after meeting with Arizona election officials and lawmakers.
Each of the arguments that have been laid out to criticize this bill are baseless speculation from the radical left because they want illegal aliens to vote in our elections. They want to disenfranchise American citizens by telling them that their votes don't matter. There's only one reason that anyone would oppose this bill, and that's because they would want to cheat. They want illegal people and aliens in this country to be able to vote for them and to rob the United States citizens of their vote. And that's why they resist us at every single level when we're trying to deport people back to their home countries or stop them from committing crimes against the American people. That's why they do not support voter ID, proof of U.S. citizenship, or clean voter rolls. That's why the Save America Act is absolutely critical to our country's future.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem holding a news conference today in Phoenix, Arizona. National News Desk reporting on her remarks. Noem said there have been cases of non-citizens registering and voting in U.S. elections. She mentioned specific examples, including an individual arrested in Iowa who she said had been registered to vote in Maryland despite being in the country illegally. She also referred to a case in Kansas where a non-citizen was charged after voting and serving as a mayor. That was from the National News Desk. TheHill.com writing about tonight's expected shutdown of the Homeland Security Department. A funding lapse would be narrower in scope than the previous two shutdowns, including the record 43-day shutdown that ended in November and the brief funding gap earlier this month. While the Homeland Security Department would be affected, it's two agencies at the heart of the funding standoff. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection would not see significant consequences. They received tens of billions of dollars from the One Big Beautiful Bill, which President Trump signed into law last year. But a DHS shutdown would have a significant impact on other agencies under the DHS umbrella, including the Transportation Security Administration, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the Coast Guard. The shutdown would also affect the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the Secret Service. That article from The Hill. Leaders of those agencies testified Wednesday before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security about the effects of a shutdown. The TSA Acting Administrator, Ha-Wen McNeil.
During the recent 43-day shutdown, TSA personnel continued to report to work without pay and kept our operations running smoothly, ensuring millions of passengers arrived at their destinations safely and securely. While average wait times across the country remained within our established standards, TSA saw increased rates of unscheduled absences and localized spikes in wait times as the shutdown dragged on and the cost of coming to work became more and more untenable for our frontline workforce. We heard reports of officers sleeping in their cars at airports to save money on gas, selling their blood and plasma and taking on second jobs to make ends meet. Many were subject to late fees for missed bill payments, eviction notices, loss of childcare, and more, all the while expected to serve their country and perform at the highest level when in uniform. 12 weeks later, some are just recovering from the financial impact of the 43-day shutdown. Many are still reeling from it. We cannot put them through another such experience. It would be unconscionable.
Transportation Security Administration Acting Administrator Ha-Wen McNeil testifying before a House Appropriations Subcommittee on Wednesday. A statement from Airlines for America, U.S. Travel and American Hotel and Lodging Association. Travelers and the U.S. economy cannot afford to have essential TSA personnel working without pay, which increases the risk of unscheduled absences and call-outs and ultimately can lead to higher wait times and missed or delayed flights. Also on the panel of witnesses before that House Appropriations Subcommittee on Wednesday, Secret Service Deputy Director Matthew Quinn.
A DHS shutdown would include our agency. The reality is, the next day, everyone will show up. We will continue to protect and serve, and to the casual observer, there will be no visible difference. However, gaps in funding have a profound impact on our agency today and into the future. There is no pause button on our mission. The paychecks may stop, but the work will continue, although morale fades as bills come in and the job that is already difficult is made more difficult. The impacts of a shutdown do not fall neatly within our core function. Rather, they manifest in areas where the results are not readily recognizable. At the top of the list is needed reform. The assassination attempt on President Trump's life brought forward hard truths for our agency and critical areas for improvement: airspace security, communications and IT infrastructure, hiring and retention, training, overarching technological improvements. We are today on the cusp of implementing generational change for our organization. A shutdown halts our reforms and undermines the momentum that we, including all of you, have worked so hard to build together. The impacts may not be seen tomorrow, but I assure you we will feel the ripple effects for some time. Delayed contracts, diminished hiring, halted new programs will be the result. We've been working hard to address needed reforms. Many of these efforts will stop with a shutdown. New personnel are not hired, or at minimum, hiring efforts slow down. New programs are paused, and our efforts to train, equip, and deploy the best and the brightest begin to lag. We've already begun planning for the multiple national special security events for 2026 and, of course, the 2028 Olympics. This critical work will continue during a shutdown. However, in many cases, it will be on the backs of our greatest resource, the men and women of the Secret Service. Our difficult mission becomes exponentially harder during a lapse in funding.
Secret Service Deputy Director Matthew Quinn testifying Wednesday before a House Appropriations Subcommittee looking at the impact of a Homeland Security Department shutdown, which appears to be on track to happen after midnight tonight. This is Washington Today. Politico writes that consumers are sour on Donald Trump's economy and GOP lawmakers are increasingly uneasy with the president's tariffs, but the White House is having a good week of news on both jobs and affordability. The Labor Department reported Friday that inflation cooled to a rate of 2.4% over the 12 months ending in January, the lowest rise in the Consumer Price Index since May. Grocery prices last month also increased by the smallest amount since last summer. That follows data showing that the economy added more jobs than expected in January, with the unemployment rate dropping to 4.3%, an early sign that the labor market may be regaining strength. That was from Politico. President Trump spoke about the inflation report as he left the White House.
Very good financial numbers, very low inflation. We brought costs way down, and the numbers were surprising, except to me, they weren't surprising. So the inflation numbers just announced, as you know, are way down, and we have it back in track. We had the worst inflation in the history of our country, and now we have very modest inflation, which is what you want to have.
President Trump speaking to reporters outside the White House. And Wall Street reaction, the Dow up 48, NASDAQ down 50, and S&P up 3. Story from Reuters, the Federal Reserve's current monetary policy setting threatens U.S. economic growth that otherwise is being underwritten by a range of Trump administration policies, including tax cuts. Fed Governor Stephen Miron said on Thursday as he again laid out the case for more interest rate cuts. He said at an event at the Dallas Fed, the biggest risk, I think, to the economy is that we're misconstruing just how tight monetary policy is. He added that he does not think there is an inflation problem. That reporting from Reuters. Here is Stephen Miron at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas.
The most recent FOMC meeting in January, you preferred to lower the rate by a quarter point. Yep. The decision was to keep rates where they were at. You've dissented other times, and others on the FOMC dissent from time to time. Can you comment on what led you to that recommendation, and what data would you need to see to come up with a different view? Or what data are you looking at that drives your view?
Sure. So there's two elements to that. Well, actually, I guess there's three elements to that. The first one is inflation. As I was just saying, I view the measured inflation data that we're getting as distorted by a couple of anomalous factors right now. There's always biases in the way that you measure inflation. The problem is if those biases change over time. If the biases change over time, you're implicitly adjusting your inflation target. And the two biases that I just mentioned, shelter and portfolio management fees, are contributing much more to inflation than they historically would have. Those biases are bigger than they used to be. And therefore, my view is that underlying inflation, looking through those biases, is actually very close to our target. If you don't look through those biases, you are implicitly moving your inflation target down. So that's one reason. Another reason is the labor market. At the end of last year, there were some signs of stress in the labor market. The last couple of prints have been a little bit better than we got at the end of last year. But nevertheless, there are some remaining signs of slack in the labor market that are of interest to me of the type that I think monetary policy could accommodate. And these are types of folks who are working part-time for economic reasons, longer periods of time spent unemployed, some folks who are marginally attached to the labor force. I think there's some space for monetary policy to help create jobs for those people and pull people into the labor force. And then lastly is the question of what economists call the output gap. And so, as you're aware, economists have supply and demand. And if supply increases by more than demand, you have what we call an output gap. That's slack in the economy, unused resources that could put to use by some monetary stimulus. And as we started off discussing before, I view the supply side of the economy as having been pushed out by a variety of factors like AI, like deregulation, like capital deepening. And these are factors that create slack in the economy. And it doesn't matter whether that slack emerges because demand goes down while supply stays here, that's a recession, right? Or demand stays here and supply moves up. And that's what I'm talking about with the productivity shocks. Right? It's still slack in the economy, increased potential output that can be accommodated by looser monetary policy. And so the combination of these things leads me to think that monetary policy is tighter than it needs to be, and that we can afford to have lower interest rates.
Federal Reserve Governor Stephen Miron Thursday night at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. He was appointed to fill the remainder of a term of a governor who resigned a number of months ago. That term ended at the end of January, but Miron can stay on until a replacement is confirmed. And President Trump has nominated Kevin Warsh to serve as the new chair of the Federal Reserve. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, has said he will not allow any Federal Reserve nominee to be approved by the Banking Committee until the criminal investigation the Trump administration has opened against the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell, whose term ends in May, is resolved. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this morning on CNBC that he believes that hearings for Kevin Warsh will go forward even if a successful vote is not assured.
I think you proposed, I guess you'd call it an off-ramp, some type of an off-ramp if the investigation would move from justice to the Banking Committee. I can't tell. I'm looking at what his comments are. He says, well, yeah, we could certainly have some type of investigation, but that would not replace the investigation for the DOJ being, that needs to be dropped first. Do you know where we stand on that, how this is going to play out?
Yeah, again, Joe, the administration has no influence on what the U.S. Attorney for D.C. does. What I was proposing was that the Senate Banking Committee also investigate this very large overrun on the Fed construction project. We'll see where the investigation goes with Jeanine Pirro's office. There were subpoenas issued, but that doesn't have to mean that there are charges. They reached out to the Fed in December via email, didn't get responses, and then issued subpoenas. So we'll see what the state of that is. I think what's important here is that at this, I spoke on Tuesday at a Republican Senate working group, and what I think is important, my understanding is that we are going to proceed with the hearings. Senator Tillis wants to keep a hold on any vote with Kevin Warsh leaving committee, making it to the full Senate. But I think it's important to get the hearings underway, and I think we have an agreement to do that.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent today on CNBC. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, later told Bloomberg Television he will not vote to confirm any Fed nominee until Chair Powell's investigation is resolved. He said, "We could have a hearing all we want, but until the investigation is done, I still believe that the initial inquiry and the investigation was a flex to try to get the current chair to step aside." Politico writing that Gavin Newsom's message to world leaders in Munich, it's time to start thinking about the next president. The California governor and likely presidential candidate said during a panel about climate change Friday at the Munich Security Conference, Donald Trump is temporary. He'll be gone in 3 years. The article says Newsom has long positioned California as a durable counterweight to Trumpism, particularly on climate policies that California has expanded as the White House retreats. He carried a similar banner at the International Climate Conference in Brazil last year, casting California as America's premier climate mover in Trump's absence. Again, reporting from Politico. Here is Governor Newsom about President Trump's climate-related policies, including yesterday's announcement that his EPA is rescinding the 2009 finding that greenhouse gases endanger public health.
Governor Newsom, what are you doing to fight the U.S. federal government's reversal on climate policies?
I'm showing up. And look, Donald Trump is doubling down on stupid. California has been a leader in climate policy going back to Ronald Reagan. 1967, Governor Ronald Reagan established the first tailpipe emissions in the United States of America, created the California Air Resources Board. 3 years later, a president by the name of Richard Nixon, another Republican, codified California's leadership under the Clean Air Act. Never in the history of the United States of America has there been a more destructive president than the current occupant in the White House in Washington, D.C. He's trying to recreate the 19th century. He's a wholly owned subsidiary of big oil, gas, and coal. He's quite literally reopening coal plants in the United States of America. He's received close to $500 million in campaign contributions. He asked for $1 billion, look it up, in return for basically eliminating all regulations in the United States of America. De facto, he just did that yesterday with federal regulations and the endangerment finding. It is code red in terms of American leadership in this space. Low carbon, green growth. And I know a thing or two about this. I represent the 4th largest economy from a GDP perspective in the world. And we ran the 4th largest economy last year, 9 out of 10 days on 100% clean energy. 2/3 renewable energy. We've seen our GDP grow by 81% since 2000, and we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 21%. 7 times more clean energy jobs than fossil fuel jobs. We're proving at scale that we can implement, we can compete, and we can dominate. But Donald Trump is trying to turn back the clock.
Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat of California, today at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Another line from the Politico article about his trip. He is one of a half-dozen potential Democratic presidential contenders offering a contrast to Vice President J.D. Vance's scathing criticism of the continent in the same forum last year. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Today on C-SPAN's Ceasefire. At a time when finding common ground matters most in Washington, we'll feature a bipartisan conversation on civility in politics, the upcoming midterm elections, and the latest news from Capitol Hill with former New York Democratic Congressman Steve Israel and former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Join host Dasha Burns.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
Today at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only on C-SPAN.
It'll also be broadcast here on C-SPAN Radio, and if you miss it, it will be available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump visited Fort Bragg, North Carolina today to thank and honor U.S. Special Forces who captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a raid on Caracas last month. Maduro is being held in the U.S. on drug smuggling charges. The president met privately with the Special Forces, but he gave remarks to the troops at large.
And no other country has the extraordinary warriors that we have. We have the best warriors in the world, because you can have the greatest equipment, but if you don't have the warriors, the equipment doesn't mean much. Last month, we proved this truth once again when some of our greatest soldiers, right here, to ever live, frankly, successfully captured the outlaw dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and brought him back to face American justice, where he's now, right now, waiting. And that was an amazing night. People saw that. They've never seen anything like it. You know, it's a pretty military country. It was a big base, one of the biggest bases in South America, where he lived. And it was in a matter of minutes before he was on a helicopter being taken out of there. They had to go through steel doors. The steels were like, it was like paper mache. You know what paper mache is? That's weak paper. These guys blasted through every door. They got up to him before he got to the big safe, but that wouldn't have worked either, because they had equipment that was going to knock that out in a matter of minutes. But he never got there. It went so fast. Think of it, in a matter of minutes, when people realize what happened, they're looking up and there's the helicopter heading back to aircraft carriers. So that night, the entire world saw what the full military might of the U.S. military is capable of. And that was an unbelievable operation, but that was a smaller operation. But it was so precise, so incredible. Nobody thought a thing like that could happen. They even talk about the discombobulator because they never got a shot off. The Russian equipment didn't work. The Chinese equipment didn't work. Everyone's trying to figure out why it didn't work. Someday you're going to find out. But it didn't work. It's nice when you can fly in and not get shot at. Although we did have 3 helicopter pilots who were wounded pretty badly in the legs, landing, and a couple of machine gunners seemed to have made it through a thicket of bombs, but they were taken out rapidly by our snipers who were stationed on platforms, actually unbelievable helicopter platforms all the way the line, and they were taken out immediately. And those pilots were incredible and really brave. I may see some of them very shortly. They were hit pretty bad in the legs. You know, they're landing a big chopper, and they're being shot at from close range by a machine gun, so that's not a comfortable feeling. They landed it perfectly, and they got out of there perfectly, and they're just brave guys and very talented, skilled people.
President Donald Trump at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He was joined on stage by Michael Whatley, former Republican National Committee chair, who is now running for a U.S. Senate seat in North Carolina as a Republican. Reuters writing the U.S. eased sanctions on Venezuela's energy sector on Friday, issuing 2 general licenses that allow global energy companies to operate oil and gas projects in the OPEC member and for other companies to negotiate contracts to bring in fresh investments. The move was the most significant relaxation of sanctions on Venezuela since U.S. forces captured and removed President Nicolas Maduro last month. That was from Reuters. The Munich Security Conference has gotten underway in Munich, Germany. It calls itself the world's leading forum for debating the most pressing challenges to international security. It's been held each year since 1963. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke to reporters Thursday night at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland before flying to Germany for the conference.
Secretary, what's your message going to be in Munich?
Oh, you got to wait till Saturday, right? Saturday? Yeah, it'll be good. It will be good. I think it'll be well received. We'll see, you know.
What do you think the Europeans are hoping to hear? Something more conciliatory than last year?
I think they want honesty. They want to know where we're going, where we'd like to go with them. So that's our hope. It's an important conference. My 3rd time, twice as Secretary of State. We'll have a lot of members of Congress there, so as well. I'll see them tomorrow as well. So it's important, and I think it's at a defining moment. And I refer you back to even the speech or the statement I gave during my nomination hearing as Secretary of State. The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone, frankly, the world I grew up in, and we live in a new era in geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to sort of re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be. And we've had many of these conversations in private with many of our allies, and they are our allies. And we need to continue to have those conversations, and I think Saturday, hopefully, and the meetings we'll have there will move us in that direction.
Do you think Greenland will be an issue, or are you going to talk about it, or is that done deal?
Greenland?
Yeah, Greenland.
Oh, I'm sure somebody will raise it, you know. Sure. We're working on that. We feel good about it.
Do you expect to meet with President Zelenskyy when you're there?
I think so. I think he's going to be there, and there's a chance to see him. I believe it's on my schedule. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm sure we will.
The Russian bombardment during all of this cold,
it's terrible. It's a war. That's why we want the war to end. People are suffering. It's the coldest time of year. It's unimaginable, the suffering. That's the problem with wars. That's why wars are bad, and that's why we've worked so hard for over a year now to try to bring this one to an end.
Why the meeting with Orban? Are you looking to help him in the polls?
Sorry, meeting with?
Orban.
Well, the president has said he's very supportive of him, and so are we. But obviously, we were going to do that visit as a bilateral visit. They came to the U.S. earlier late last year. We told them that when I had an opportunity, I would visit, and this is the best opportunity. It's very close by. We're also going to go by Slovakia, which is we met with them at the end of last year in Florida, or early this year, I forget, during the holidays. So we also told them we'd go by. So it just made sense to sort of stack it onto this trip.
So this is going to be your 3rd transatlantic trip in the last week.
It is? Oh, because
3rd time crossing the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's right. Well, then I got a 4th time on the way back, yeah.
So what is there a message here for Europe, or is it just basically, well, I went to the Olympics and now I'm doing Munich?
Message?
To Europe.
Well, I don't know, guys. I mean, I didn't schedule the Olympics and I didn't schedule Munich. They're on our schedule. You know, those are pre-existing events. We went to both. Europe's important to us. We're very tightly linked to Europe. I think most people in this country can trace both either their cultural or their personal heritage back to Europe. So we're deeply tied to Europe, and our futures have always been linked and will continue to be. So we just got to talk about what that future looks like.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters Thursday night at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland before flying to Germany for the Munich Security Conference. As he mentioned, he's scheduled to give a speech on Saturday. Today at the conference, the New York Times reports the leaders of France and Germany delivered sweeping criticisms of President Trump's treatment of the transatlantic alliance, appealing at Europe's largest annual security conference on Friday for a stronger Europe that could both work with the United States and confront Russia. Again, that was the article at the New York Times. Here is the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who spoke mostly in German during his speech, but switched for 1 minute to English.
Let me paraphrase this for our American friends in English. For 3 generations, trust amongst allies, partners and friends has made NATO the strongest alliance of all times. Europe knows deeply how precious this is. In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone. Dear friends, being a part of NATO is not only Europe's competitive advantage. It's also the United States' competitive advantage. So let's repair and revive transatlantic trust together. We, the Europeans, we are doing our part.
Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. The French President Emmanuel Macron also gave a speech there and advocated for a stronger, united Europe that defends its interests.
We should be proud of our European achievement and know our strengths. Obviously, we have to fix a lot of things. We were all together yesterday in a retreat to speak about our competitiveness. And we know the homework we have to deliver. But let's speak about our homework behind closed doors and let's deliver. But let's provide a positive image of ourselves and let's be proud of ourselves, because this is what our fellow citizens need. And this is, I really believe, the reality of this continent. We should be proud of our European achievements, indeed. And we Europeans are proud to play down ourselves and to endure that others would do so too. We shouldn't, period. This doesn't mean that we are not challenged, but let's face this challenge and let's fix them.
French President Emmanuel Macron at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. New York Times writing about his remarks. Macron makes a not-so-subtle reference to President Trump's designs on Greenland, saying we must show the world our unwavering determination to defend our own interests. Then he adds that the stance includes politely declining claims of European territory. That was from the New York Times. Al Jazeera writing about the Munich Security Conference. 60 heads of state and government and about 100 foreign and defense ministers have descended on the Bavarian southern German city amid high security, with about 5,000 police deployed for the event. There are also delegations of U.S. lawmakers there. About a dozen senators, Republicans and Democrats, led by Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, and Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina. Also, several U.S. House members in attendance. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, the Foreign Relations Committee ranking member, was on a panel today about the war in Ukraine, along with the foreign affairs ministers from France, Great Britain, Ukraine, and the Netherlands. Russian and Ukrainian envoys plan to meet with U.S. negotiators next week in Geneva, and the week after is the 4th anniversary of the war.
Ms. Shaheen, can you just offer your view on the American position? And are you worried that that Donald Trump, who obviously is is pushing for a peace deal, he wants to be able to say that he's managed to negotiate these two sides, and it's absolutely right what Minister Sabia said, that we wouldn't be in this situation had it not been for the pressure from the Trump administration on the two sides to get talking. But are you worried that that desire for an outcome could lead to the American side putting undue pressure on the Ukrainians to accept a deal that is not in Ukraine's favor, including giving up the whole of the Donbass, and without doing that American security guarantees won't be forthcoming?
Well, I am worried.
like I assume everybody here is worried about what the outcome of any peace agreement would be. And we have a very large bipartisan delegation here from the Senate mostly, but also from the House. We're having this little funding issue in the U.S., which you may be following, that's keeping many of our House members away. But we are here because we support Ukraine. I would echo, as I'm sure everyone would, all of the comments of the panelists here about the importance of what Ukraine has done, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe, for democracies around the world. And I want to make sure that whatever outcome happens, it's one that Ukrainians are comfortable with, and one that ensures that Vladimir Putin and Russia are not going to reinvade Ukraine or any other NATO country or any other European country for that matter. And I think I applaud Donald Trump for, and I'm not a member of his party, but I applaud the effort to get the parties to the table. But the United States and this Trump administration should have put much more pressure, should be putting more pressure on Vladimir Putin. We have legislation in the Senate with 85 co-sponsors that would put severe secondary sanctions on those countries that do business with Russia. We need to pass that. We need to ensure that there is a price to pay for supporting Russia's war machine.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, on a panel on the war in Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. President Trump was asked about the war in Ukraine as he left the White House today, and he said Russia wants to make a deal and Zelensky's going to have to get moving. Otherwise, he's going to miss a great opportunity. He has to move. Referring, of course, to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who was interviewed at the Munich Security Conference today by Politico reporter Dasha Burns.
When talking about progress towards peace, do you think the president and his team have made substantial progress? Where do you think you would be on the path to peace without the United States? Further behind, further ahead, or where you are now?
Now, first of all, it's difficult without between us.
Just
Ukraine, yeah, between all of us. It's a secret. Don't tell anybody. Yeah. So, be honest. Today, only Ukraine defending Europe, and today only Europe gives money to Ukraine and helps Ukraine. Today, only United States can stop Putin, and today only Putin wants this war to continue. And this is my position. That's why when you understand this way of Putin, or way of how he thinks, if he thinks, I don't know, maybe he made a decisions at the very beginning and now just move through this idea. Yeah. So, and when you understand this infrastructure, that's why it's needed. If only United States can stop Putin, that they have to do more pressure on him to stop him. Otherwise, he will not stop.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the Munich Security Conference. This is Washington today. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Michael Walz showed up at a panel discussion at the Security Conference with hats that said, "Make the UN Great Again," or MUNGA. An audience member asked Walz, another panelist, Kaja Kallas from Estonia, she's now High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, about President Trump's foreign policy. The answer did go on for several minutes.
Pisarska, I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum, Poland. My question to you, Ambassador Walz, just an honest reply, please. Does America...
You have it pretty straightforward and honest so far.
Does America need a rules-based order? And if so, what are you willing to also sacrifice, because you have been backing this world order for years and years. And thanks to the United States of America, many of us, including Poland, has benefited immensely. And what we're seeing now is a withdrawal. That's an honest, I think, assessment of many of us. And we just ask ourselves, are you willing to fight with us, the Europeans and others, for this world order? And the same question really to Kaja Kallas. Do you feel that the Europeans are willing to really fight for this order?
Thank you.
And I would follow your question, are the Europeans willing and able to take the tough financial steps necessary? I'm a recovering politician myself. I know how tough those votes are when you have a social support system. But look, to answer your question directly, absolutely. The American people have underwritten with their hard-earned dollar the global multilateral rules-based order since World War II. However, with 37 trillion in debt and counting, the massive debt load that the Western world is facing, I think it is fair on their behalf to ask 450 million Europeans with the same size economy as the United States to be more self-sustaining in their own defense. And it astounds me why that is so controversial I mean, it is...
Ambassador, I think it's not.
It's a fair question. When I go to people in Indiana and Georgia and North Florida that I represented, and it is their money paying more than 180 countries combined into the UN system, it's fair to say, yes, I have to look at them honestly and say it's being well spent, and it's not.
Absolutely. And indeed, I think as Chancellor Merz made very clear, the Europeans have belatedly got the message. And there is a recognition that, defense spending has gone up and is going to go up further. Europe needs to get his act together, and I'm going to come to Kaja Kallas again. There's an absolute, that was very clear in Chancellor.
But it wasn't clear in 2014. Why not?
It was. It took.
We're acting as though things were coming unglued now. It's been coming unglued for 10 years, and no one was responding in an effective way. Now we're asking more forcefully.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing a good result as a result of the 5%.
That was being asked from the audience was, if the Europeans are responding now, do you still believe in multilateralism in this order? Do you still believe in it? Or, as Chancellor Merz said, he said, and I just wrote it down, even the US is reaching the limits of its own power if it goes alone. Do you agree with him that the US could not go alone?
I mean, I'm looking at the grouping I just discussed of our Gulf Arab allies. I'm looking at the Abraham Accords. I'm looking at the fact that the president didn't need to take on Azerbaijan, Armenia, and he did. He didn't need to take on Pakistan and India, and he did. And we're asking the rest of the world to be there with us in a fair way financially, because there is a cost to the status quo, and the status quo was not sustainable anymore. And that's, I think, on behalf of our constituents, a fair question to ask.
Kaja, how do you respond to that? It's a reasonable point, surely.
No, of course it is. But if you look at also to the United Nations and all the contributions, then when it comes to the development aid, Europe is doing the biggest share. So I don't really buy this argument that we are not doing anything. In the beginning you said also that. Is it that actually the rules of jungle and the might makes right actually has always been there? And one might say that is true, that those who have the power have had different rules. But even in jungle, animals cooperate, and so you are better off when you work with others. And if you think, in the global, if we take the superpowers, what is actually the difference? When for example, Russia goes to war, they go alone because they don't have allies. When America goes to wars, then, a lot of us go with you and we lose our people on the way. So that means that you also need us in your to be this superpower. Because if we look at the bigger picture, I mean, in terms of economic might, I mean, China is a very, very powerful country. In terms of military might as well. So what is the difference between you and the other superpowers so far is the allies. So, but I'm coming to this point that, of course, we are willing to fight for the world where there are some kind of rules, because majority, or actually all the European countries are small countries, or those who haven't realized that they are small countries yet. But we are small countries, so we need a rules-based order. And it is clear that the current rules-based order, it has been put in place after the Second World War, considering all what was happening there, what were the powers fighting then, and it doesn't serve the world right now. But what serves the world is, the rules really that are, protecting everybody, so that nobody is above the law. And I think that is the difference. That we actually want partnerships that are based on dignity, where we actually listen to the other party and we care also what the other countries are thinking about. So it's not like we make decisions in this Board of Peace Charter, for example, that you don't have to actually take into account anybody who is on that organization, because one person can make the decisions. And that is, I think, the difference how we see the world. Because if countries are treated equally, I think there's also less chance for war and tyranny.
Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. She's a former politician from Estonia. On a panel at the Munich Security Conference, along with U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Michael Walz. You also heard from the moderator, Zanny Minton-Beddos, economist editor-in-chief. CNN writing a SpaceX capsule carrying 4 astronauts has launched on its way to the International Space Station, beginning a journey that will bring the orbiting laboratory back to full staff after a month of operating with a skeleton crew. The mission, called Crew 12, lifted off at around 5:17 a.m. Eastern Friday from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The spacecraft is expected to dock with the ISS Saturday afternoon. That reporting from CNN. NASA held a news conference after the launch, and NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman was asked about the schedule for Artemis 2. That's the mission to send humans around the moon, which has been delayed due to technical problems.
Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now. Thank you for taking the time. To the administrator, during your remarks with Steve Sisloff, you mentioned earlier today, well, I guess yesterday, that there were a series of mini wet dress rehearsals for the SLS rocket. I wonder if you can go into a little more detail on this particular stage of the testing, and if that was able to inform a date for the full next wet dress rehearsal. Thanks.
Sure. So I think we're going to provide additional details on that tomorrow. The teams wanted to have a chance to get together and review the data before taking a position on whether or not we are going to advance to a full wet dress 2 or undertake additional kind of mini tests. This should make a lot of sense, right? On Artemis 1, we were combating hydrogen leaks multiple times on that. We obviously encountered that again on the Artemis 2 wet dress rehearsal. We already communicated through a blog that we replaced some seals, and now we want to do as many tests as we possibly can before stepping into a full wet dress operation again, to just gain confidence. We will provide more details tomorrow, at least from some of the early views. We did not see some of the leaks for the portion of the test we were running that at a comparable period during the full Artemis 2 wet dress we did. So it's an early indication, but we'll share more details as we get into it tomorrow. But I think the idea is we will continue to do everything available to gain confidence going into the full wet dress.
NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman at a news conference today in Florida after this morning's launch of a SpaceX capsule with 4 astronauts going to the International Space Station. Artemis 2 currently scheduled for launch no earlier than March 6th. At the Winter Olympics in Italy, an American, Rich Ruanen from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, has now become the oldest person ever to compete in a Winter Olympics. He took part in a curling match against Switzerland on Thursday, and he was interviewed this morning on the NBC Today show.
It was a lifelong dream, and we made a lot of sacrifices, my family, my 2 kids, and my wife, to pursue this dream and to be so close so many times and not have it happen. And then got kind of fortunate to have these guys pick me up and tried to help them out in any way I could. And to get out there it's a dream. It's about perseverance and working hard and just hanging in there, and a little bit of luck.
Yeah. Rich, you're 54, twice the age of your average teammate. Is it true that you were at one point thinking about getting a T-shirt that said, "I'm not the dad and I'm not the coach"?
I actually have that T-shirt. I had my son make it with his buddy, so I have it here, and I should have worn it today. If I knew you were going to ask that question, absolutely, because people always say you're the old guy, so you must be the coach. And I'm like, I'm not the dad, I'm not the coach, and half the guys that are coaching out here I played against for the last 30 years. So, and that's a true story. There's probably like 20 of them out there.
Great.
So
that's great.
It's great.
Rich Ruohonen on NBC's Today Show this morning. At 54 years old, he broke the record for oldest Winter Olympian, surpassing American figure skater Joseph Savage, who was 52 in the 1932 Winter Olympics. And the oldest Olympian ever was Oscar Swan of Sweden, who won a silver medal in shooting in the 1920 Summer Olympics at age 72. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Remember, tonight, C-SPAN Ceasefire airs at 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern, and this week, host Dasha Burns will welcome two former members of Congress, Steve Israel, Democrat from New York, and Charlie Dent, Republican from Pennsylvania, to talk about bipartisanship and civility in politics and this year's upcoming midterm elections. C-SPAN's Ceasefire tonight, 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern. Have a good night and holiday weekend. C-SPAN will not air on President's Day. We'll be back on Tuesday, 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern.